All right. Kevin Walsh is with us this morning. Kevin, good morning to you. How are you getting on? You can hear us all right, Kevin, can you?
Morning.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Good, thanks. There's the line is just coming through there. The as Owen says, the universe would have exploded if the races were on and Sam Maguire had been there at the same time.
Yeah, it would be very hard to manage the two of them, but look, we had plans in place, so we'd have no problem with it. But yeah, just a bit disappointing we didn't have it to go with the races. And years gone by, I suppose people, and particularly the players, were always minding themselves from race week, and this was an ideal week to celebrate something if they'd won it. But unfortunately, it wasn't to be.
Was there a point in the game where you thought, actually, you know what, we might get this done?
So, can you hear me there, Ger?
Yeah. I'm just wondering, was there a specific point in the game where you did allow yourself to believe that actually Galway were going to win?
I suppose when he came back from 16-14 to 16-all, I think it was around the 63rd, 64th minute. It was anyone's game at that point. So, but look, it was an open game. It was a game that could have gone either way. I suppose at the end of the day, maybe the subs had a huge impact from Kerry, where our own bench wasn't as strong as you'd like it to be, and Kerry kind of pulled away in the end. But look, it was there for us. It was there right through the game, and it was up and down. I think it was 6 times it was level. So it wasn't the case that it was never there for us, but it just wasn't to be in the day.
Kevin, why was it an open game? Because everybody in the build-up was saying expect a cagey affair where both defensive systems really come out on top. What happened that allowed the whole thing to break free?
I think I'm not so sure it broke free, but it was far more open than a few more games. But I would say that the stall was set out fairly early, where Kerry in particular, we say, threw a few high balls in early. I think they probably did go after maybe the full back line and the goalkeeper for Galway, which wasn't tested against Derry. And I think once those few kicks went in and out fairly early, that kind of bet the blanket defence a bit earlier. And then from the Kerry side, I felt that, I did say last week in the build-up to it, I still don't think they're there in relation to getting the sweeper right. It was fierce open, particularly for, and Shane actually had a great game, obviously, but he was given hand passes in front, bounce passes in front, which wouldn't happen normally with a tight defence. So I'd say it just was that bit more open, where it wasn't, I suppose the defences weren't given that chance to set up more as much as the last semi-finals and stuff.
Because that Kerry defensive system, it seemed, in the first couple of plays of the game, was going to be under severe pressure from Galway. Like, I think they got to grips with Galway, or maybe Galway started doing something different. What was your read on that, Kevin? Because it looked like Galway were going to break with the tradition of Kerry giving up maybe like 1 or 2 goal chances in this game.
Yeah, my reading on it, to be honest with you, I was looking at it from high up in the stand. And I thought that Kerry, to be honest with you, whether it was part of a plan or they decided to go after Galway, but they certainly didn't have the back protected. And I know Morley would be the sweeper all the time, but there was certainly no sweeper in front of those stinky little passes, and it was wide open for her. I could see it. So it was a lovely kind of a game for the likes of Shane to get there, because he went into full forward quite a bit, and he was receiving balls in the middle 3 lanes, which would be, I suppose, defensively you wouldn't be overly happy with that. So there was straight runs, which didn't take a whole pile to have to manoeuvre around defences. So look at Kerry, I suppose they pushed up in the middle third, but they definitely did leave the back open for the likes of Shane inside. I think they probably tightened up. I noticed that after 25 minutes or so, where excuse me, Stephen O'Brien actually ended up back doing a little bit of sweeping, but it wasn't an out-and-out Tyke Morley all day in the first 25 minutes or so. But I think they did start to cover up the back a bit more after that.
We actually have a clip from GEA Sense on Twitter that we can run now. So the score was 15-14 at this stage, and Galway had a bit of an overlap. This is from the side camera, where it's just a Galway kick out that Kerry actually get a handle on, but then a multitude of Galway footballers break forward, and unfortunately just the wrong action is taken. So it looks like Matthew Tierney has the ball and ends up they recycle, and a shot gets taken and it goes wide, but Johnny Heaney and Finian O'Lee are on the overlap on the inside. Was there just a sense maybe that Galway didn't quite fully realise the opportunity they had, that they could have been more killer instinct when it comes to going for goals for whatever reason?
Yeah, I actually remember that incident live. I obviously can't see it here at the minute, and I haven't seen it on television afterwards either, but I remember there was Johnny Heaney and one other at the time. I remember there was an option, and I don't think it looked up. Was it Matthew Tierney that had the ball? Was it?
I'm pretty sure it was Matthew Tierney who had the ball. I think it's Finian O'Lee. Yeah. That was GA Sense on Twitter for the clip.
Okay, I have to see it. I have to see it again. But I actually remember one of those live where it was on. But I think it was probably, I'm not so sure, was it a belief of that, or it was just one of those situations where it wasn't seen, or like you said, was it just kind of going back and playing safe and holding on to possession? I have to see it again, to be honest. But look, I don't think it was down to that. I think if you look at, I noticed there maybe, if you look at it, I think it was 14 points each after 47 minutes or so. That's quite high scoring if you look at it. But I think Galway didn't score for another 16 minutes. I think it was 63rd minute they scored, and again, and inside 30 seconds they got a second point to bring it back to 16-all, and that was the finish of it. So bar that minute of 2 points from 47 minutes on to 75 minutes, Galway didn't score in that period. And again, you'd have to maybe look at the bench and say, well, was the legs fresh enough? I thought Paul Connery would have moved in and on full forward there for 4 or 5 minutes, looking at it live. And it looked like to me he was moving in, getting a break. And at that point, Kerry had more than gone off at half time, so they had fresh legs there at that point. So I suppose that's, you need to have your bench fairly loaded for an Ireland final day, and I'm not so sure that Galway believe in the full bench they had.
What was your take on the Damien Comer situation?
I know Damien found himself outside the defensive line quite a bit. Definitely, he was marked completely. I done an article on how he was marked against Kerry. I spoke about how Rogers marked him not looking at the ball. Damien got loads of space where the defender didn't have a clue where the ball was coming from. This was different. Foley was right beside him, pulling at him all day. Never gave him an inch, and was seeing the man and seeing the ball, which is a huge difference. And I suppose Damien then found to get the ball in there early, or found it hard to get the ball in early, and found himself after making runs being out around the offensive line or defensive line for Kerry, which definitely didn't suit him. But look, just one of those games, I suppose, that he didn't get into it as much as he'd like. And I suppose if you could get Shane Welch and Damien firing on the one day, you'd have massive opportunities. But it was just one of Damien's days that was, I suppose, he was taken out of it.
Is there a responsibility on the team to try and find a way to get him into it, or is that because of the marking has been so? Like, I wonder, is there better ball that needs to go in? Do they need to take some risks to get him into the game? At the start of the second half, for example, he's 1-on-1. Do you just pump a few balls in and see if he wins 1 out of 3? That's break even because the damage that he can do is significant. Or do you not take that risk because the stakes get so high?
Look, the stakes are quite high, and I mean, just putting ball in for the sake of putting it in and hope works out in from the centre of the field is probably not your best case scenario. But look, we've all seen Damien in the past, in particular back post. You take the ball down, down lane 1 or lane 5 on the sidelines, and 1 or 2 crossfield balls in the back post with Damien. That's his bread and butter. And anybody would find it really hard to work with him on that. And it wasn't a case that Kerry had 4 or 5 people in front of Damien or anything like that. But I thought there was definitely opportunities to take the ball down, as I said, on the sidelines and crossfield balls back post. The sweeper will be taken completely out, and Damien has a great pair of hands. So I didn't see any of that happening on the day. That was something that definitely I would have felt would have been a threat for 2 or 3 times. But back to your point, I suppose, the way the game is and how good people are at getting out with sweepers and moving forward, you just don't hoof ball in all day and hope it works out. But certainly 2 or 3 times it would be nice to see that.
Well, yeah, I realise that the risk, and so it's not a tactic, and you can't use it as like, oh, we're just going to lorry ball in. But to try and get one of your key players into the game in a way that's going to be meaningful, sometimes you need to take risks. And maybe it's not high ball, maybe it's something else. But some way to get Comer into the game at half time, it felt necessary if Galway were going to be able to win the game. Yeah,
and again, look at it, and it's not high. I know we talk about risk. It's not a case that everyone should be afraid to kick the ball in. That's not the case. I mean, we have to put it in at certain occasions, but there's ways of doing that. As I said, to the back post, the crossfield ball, and then definitely if it's a really tight mark going on. I mean, I spoke about this, the screening side of things. Yes, the other players can help the likes of Damien get involved, but again, particular from, if you look at, and this is, I suppose, the worrying point of it, other than Johnny Heaney, I think having 2 shots, 1 being blocked and not over the bar, I don't think any of our 4 forwards had a shot on goal other than Shane Walsh and Johnny Heaney maybe twice. And I suppose that is the worrying side of it. So if that's not happening, I suppose there could be done other work, even to release the likes of Damien Comer. And then again, Damien himself probably will look back on this and say that he did have the ball a few times, particularly in the second half, just on the outside of the offensive arc, where maybe he could have taken on the guy once or twice as well. So again, it seemed to be played at a low risk area, because Damien is quite strong and could afford probably to take on one or two guys a bit more often. But just on the day, it didn't happen.
And that's kind of like one of the really interesting ways that you kind of look at this game, because at halftime it felt the narrative was, Galway are in the lead, but everything has gone their way. Whereas I was kind of half thinking, well, Comer has barely kicked the ball. I think he touched the ball once. And then on top of that, their kickouts were an absolute disaster. So if you add those two things into the mix, and it's only a 4-point defeat, which is pretty flattering to Kerry in the end, like there are a couple of things that you come away from a Galway perspective and think, Jesus, that All Ireland was there for them.
Absolutely. And again, and I hear talk about Kerry going on dominating football for the next number of years because of the age profile. I don't see that. I mean, from what I saw from Kerry there was that they'll be quite happy to get over the line. And if you take into account the kick-out strategy looked to be very poor, we'll say there was 25 shots for Kerry, I think 25 shots for Galway on goal, 35 for Kerry. Kerry had 8 wides to 1, I think at half-time, or 7-1. But at the same time, Galway are right in that game. So you'd have to say that, and even with the bench, Kerry's bench made a big impact where Galway's didn't. And they didn't seem to, I suppose, believe they had an impact on the bench. So, you just wonder if the likes of a Peter Cook, a Tom Flynn, a Fintan Curran, Kieran Duggan, I don't know where them guys are at the minute, but you just wonder if the bench was loaded a bit stronger, particularly for the midfield area. Kerry had already moved their midfielders at half-time, so there was fresh legs there. So it's just, if you're taking all those into account, and Kerry, they're flattered to get over the line with 4 points, you would, you'd say if just one or two more stood up, that was there for us.
Would you make that like a point of priority over the next couple of months to try and get at least one of those middle third players that you mentioned there back into the squad? Like, we're not privy to a lot of the conversations that have happened under Joyce and the reasons for some people not being there, but on the evidence that you saw on Sunday, would you make it your priority to try and get a couple of them back in?
I certainly would. I absolutely would. I mean, look at when I was there myself, I know, like the Sean Armstrong and guys like that had been, maybe 31, 32. I'd certainly be looking to see where we can improve, and whatever it takes to get, players that will do a job for you there, or maybe something like young that's coming through, whatever it's going to be. But there's certainly, you'd have to say that the bench probably wasn't loaded as much as you'd like it, in particular on the final day, where you have a huge pitch and that kind of stuff, and in particular where, as I said, Kerry their bench did make that impact. So, look, it's just a pity. And I know people say, that nothing to lose and it's first time up there and that kind of stuff, but I mean, you have everything to lose. It's an All-Ireland final, and we don't know who or where and who will be there again. It could be the same two teams again, but we don't know. And you've got to make the best of every opportunity. So, look, it's still a learning curve. Jack Lynn stood up, which is great to see the young fella playing well. Kenny McDay.
Oh, the line has just gone. Yeah, so we'll get that line back. But that is interesting. I think it's a fair point. The two things there. You never know when you're going to get back, and there was a strong suggestion that this was going to be Conroy's last season because he's been around for so long. Kevin Walsh is back, so I may as well actually put that to you. Kevin, that's an excellent point you're making there about you never know when you're going to get back. Apparently Silk is going to go travelling for a year and Conroy might be finishing up, so it won't be the same team irrespective of what happens next season.
Yeah, look, there's always movements. I mean, every single year, regardless of what we think, but the movements for every team. I'm sure Kerry have movements and Dublin will movements next year, and God knows, Dublin may be getting one or two of their players back next year. There will be big players as well. So every time you get an opportunity, it's not a case of, well, there's nothing to lose here. When you get to finals, there's everything to lose. So, and again, look, unfortunately, we've lost this one, but like they've performed well. A few areas, the kick-outs need to improve. I suppose, like we spoke about the middle area, we certainly need more options in that middle area, and get everybody you can to load your bench, because in the day, that load in your bench puts awful pressure on people that's playing as well, in a good way, because you're challenging each other every single night of training, and you're also, match time. Some people might say, well, you feel pressure. Players should be able to deal with pressure, and if there's someone looking over your shoulder that someone is going to come in because you're not playing too well, you're going to have to raise your game to 5%. And every time you have to raise it to 5%,
yeah,
and there's a bench behind you, I don't mean play out of fear here. I mean play out of respect for what's coming behind you, that you're going to drive on. And, look at, as I said to you, from what I seen from the Kerry team the last day, albeit they're champions now, I wouldn't be saying at this stage they're going to go on and dominate football like Dublin did. I think there's plenty of frailties. I wrote an examiner last week as to why Galway should win this game. And I think if you look back on some of the points raised, I think it's relevant. So I would just say, look, it's a learning curve, but certainly get as many people in as many places as you can to be as competitive as you can.
One last thing, when the opportunities came in the second half, when they got back in front and when they got back level, was there a bit at that stage where actually the inexperience of the group told in that maybe they just didn't fully appreciate where they could damage Kerry, and they kind of fell back on being slightly conservative, when actually what the game needed from a Galway perspective at that stage was to really go for it and to just ratchet up the ante as much as you possibly could?
Yeah, and I suppose then you have to have the bodies to do that as well. So it's very hard to say from outside, but I don't know why Galway experience, because Kerry haven't that much experience either. I know they're Division 1 champions, but this is championship. So, and I suppose the experience Kerry had was, 15 minutes coming down the stretch against Dublin. You can use that two ways. You can say, well, Kerry got over the line and they were resilient, or you can say, you know what, this is the team that could be tested again in that last 15 minutes if you put the pressure, like you said, put the ante up. And again, that's what I'm back on the legs in this. Is I'm not so sure that everybody had the legs to go and put the ante up, and that's where the bench will come in. That maybe the likes of runners and whatever, that they could actually put the pressure on, because at that stage you had two subs in for Kerry at half time. I think you had someone else in again on the 43rd minute. Paddy Clifford taken off for a blood sub for about 4 minutes, got his break, he came back in, and where I think we only had one or two subs in. Yeah. Not that early, but hadn't a huge impact.
Yeah. All right, Kevin, we'll leave it there. Good stuff. Thanks a million for joining us. Cheers.
No problem, Jordan. That's okay. Thanks so much.
Kevin Walsh giving us his thoughts from a Galway perspective on the All-Ireland football final. That's pretty interesting, Owen, to get that sense that that's one that they're going to feel they left behind.
Yeah, 100%. And this is not going to make it any easier for Galway as well. But I think that if they got to the same final next year, if they get another chance against Kerry next year, there's a chance Kerry might improve. Like, I definitely feel that the nervousness we were talking about earlier in the show, I think that might have been a factor, and they didn't play very, very well on Sunday. There's a chance if they played each other next year, Kerry could play well. Like, and you just don't know when this opportunity will present itself. Like, I mean, the thing is, like, if we're talking about Kerry and how Tally's come in and had a great influence in year one, it does seem the transformation under Cian O'Neill at Galway has been pretty quick as well. Like, this is I know that the Joyce on the sideline isn't new, but some of the backroom team that he's surrounded himself with is relatively fresh, and that's one of the real sources of encouragement, that you'd think next year they could maybe edge forward again. It's just, are the other teams around them, are they going to race forward at a greater pace? Yeah, and it's interesting that there was a list of players that Kevin could name off there who he thought would be able to have an impact from the bench, and so there's no quick fix. There might be a quick fix to the issue of them not having enough strength and depth. Yeah, and that's a fascinating internal political conversation as well. As I said, we're not quite sure the details of many of these departures, and I'm sure Joyce had to take a tough stand. And I'm not talking about any of the players necessarily that Kevin mentioned there. There's a whole line of other players that have departed the panel, and I'm sure part of that is the manager laying down the law and having everybody on side, and then to kind of not roll back from it, but to try and go back to some of those players to try and get them back into the squad could be a challenge. But that's the nature of management, and it just looks in that middle third that they could do with an extra player or two there. Yeah, I think Tommy made the point that the team has transformed from the last Galway team who was in an All-Ireland semi-final, and that's just a couple of years ago. So there has been a huge turnover, and maybe they can go back to some of those and say, right, now you see what the standard is, but you see what the prize is too, get on board.